All right, welcome again to this study on the proofs of God. This is a lesson, I believe, lesson 3, where no, this is lesson 4, I believe, where we're going to talk about, now that we have talked about the proof of God and how we know who God is by studying the creation. We know that God created the heavens and the earth, and we know that God is the only true God. We know that God is he proved himself by his power and by the evidence in the creation. This lesson tonight is going to be focusing on the proof of God by the power of God and the distinction of God. In other words, God being distinguished from all other gods in the world. And what my objective in this lesson is to show you that God is the only God because he is distinguished from all of the false gods by his miraculous power and his glory. And when one thing I would need to go back and say that we need to go over the point that all false religions start at the Tower of Babel, or they start out of Babylon. And we could go back in history and research when the various false religions got started and the ones that are that were in Babylon, the ones that were in Egypt, and we'll find that all of them have the characteristics of anti-godness, the worship of man, and the involvement of the devil. All of them, and we also said that the false gods, you didn't really get the names of false gods in the Bible until after the Tower of Babel. So the Tower of Babel is the introducer of, and it has that characteristic of false religions and false gods. And all of the false gods and all the false religions all over the world, we can find out by research and by historical search that they were started from Babylon, and they have some branch of the anti-godness that was at the Tower of Babel in them. All of the tenets, if you read them, you'll see that they are very, very carnal, very, very fleshly, and many of them are very, very demon-inspired. And so we're not playing games with them, and we're not playing that game of you can believe whatever God you want to believe, and you're right. No, they're not right. And if they don't believe in the only true God, they are not right. I don't agree with that. I don't go for that. Those of you in that camp, is the reason why you're in that camp is because you don't know yourself, the true God. And you don't know the real origin of God. And so that's why you can say that. Well, they just, respect everybody's religion. Listen, that's for this modern political correctness, democratic government and all that kind of stuff, where they pass a lot of laws against God, because they're involved in, that's Babylon. They're against God, so you expect that from them. The world is in darkness, and Paul talks about it in Romans chapter 1, that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were they thankful, but they made up all kinds of false gods. And so he is describing the way the world is. The world is against God. From the Tower of Babel, even up to now, the world is generally against God. And we as saints and Christians, we don't go with that stuff to anybody. You believe anything you want to believe. We don't believe that. You end up being burned up in the lake that burns with fire and brimstone, believing in some of that junk, because Babylon is going to fall. You read Revelation 17:18, Babylon the Great is coming down. Okay, so but in Romans chapter 1, verse number 20, for the invisible, it says that let's go to verse number 18. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who hold the truth in unrighteousness, because that which may be known of God is manifest to them. It's in the creation. For God has shown it unto them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse, because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were they thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish hearts were darkened. And possessing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into the image made like to corruptible men, and to birds, and four-footed beasts, and to creeping things. Wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness. So he's telling you the condition of the world, the conditions of false religion. They try to drag God down in the mud instead of worshiping him up where he's supposed to be. And so all of the false religions that are in the world are a result of the Tower of Babel and the rebellion of Babylon. They are a rebellion of Babylon. The Babylon is known for being the helm of false religion, anti-godness. They had in Babylon the Tower of Babel, which was in the 11th chapter of the book of Genesis, and then later on there was Babylon, the kingdom. I think somewhere around 600 BC, where the Tower of Babel was actually torn down, and then Babylon, the kingdom, under Nebuchadnezzar, rebuilt it. They rebuilt that Tower of Babel, and in that Tower of Babel, they had all kinds of false worship. They built it, I think it had 7 tiers to it, and on the top of it was a blue tier, a blue house, almost like you might say the air traffic controller. It's on the top of the airport. And in that, they called that thing, because they were mocking Israel by then, they called that thing the Holy of Holies. And the things that went on in that place, the horrible, all kinds of sexual and false gods and zodiacs and all kinds of things, that it was just like the cluster, the seed of all of the wicked religions, all clustered in one place. And so that was the rebuilding of the Tower of Babel by Nebuchadnezzar, and it was a horrible. They had a horrible legacy of idolatry. The Babylonians did. The false gods, the pagans. This is where paganism come from. The false god Rimmons, and the false god of it's called Skitklus. It was a pagan Babylonian god, and the Rimmons was a Syrian god. What are these gods? These gods are gods that are made up by men. They're made up, and they're created because these gods, they worship them in their sin and their ungodliness. The false pagan gods, Sukkot, Nemoth, worshipped by and in Babylon and in Samaria. One by the name of Marduk. That was one of the main gods of the Babylonians. And there was a Tammuz, the god Tammuz. She was also worshipped in Babylon. And all of these false gods, Tukot, and just a host of them that were originated in Babylon, and they were replicated by some form or another in other countries like Baal and all of those false gods of the Old Testament. All of them came after and from the Tower of Babel. And so along with the false gods came the false religion, and it came false miracles. They came the priests like the priests that were in the Egyptian priests that that withstood Moses, Janus and Jambres, those are all false gods, the gods of the Egyptians. There were no other gods. It was just that in their imagination, as Paul said, they created and made these gods up. And so the true God is distinguished from the false gods. The true God, what I want to show you out tonight, is that the true God is the God that made the heavens and the earth, and the God that spoke to Adam and Eve, the God that spoke to Noah, the God that was the God of all mankind, because man was one on the earth, and there was no no Trinity or anything like that. The idea of the Trinity comes out of Babylon as well. I don't mean to offend anybody, but if you do your research, you'll find it out, because it was the pagan world's suggestion or infiltration into, quote, Christianity, the polytheism of the Trinity. And it's so infiltrated, it's so widespread that the Trinitarians call those who believe in the one true God heretics. But even if every Trinitarian tonight will research it, they will have to admit to you that that was not in the original Christian faith of the first century. But it came when Constantine locked arms with the Babylonian influenced religions of Rome. And Babylon was the what we call the first world power that influenced the world in religious ideas and stuff like that, and philosophy. And the Babylonians, then the Medes and the Persians, they grasped a lot of things from the Babylonians. Then from the Medes and the Persians, then the Medes and the Persians took and what they had learned from the Babylonians about worship and things like that, and they gave it to the Greeks. Then the Greeks had it, the Babylonian influence in their educational systems and things of this nature. Then from the Greeks, the Romans got it. And so when the Romans had it in the time of Constantine and the time of Christ, so the Romans, it was their job to not only infiltrate the world with all of these things, but to now infiltrate what was now called Christianity. And so they brought in the Trinity in that from that particular infiltration. And so all false religions, and I'm saying this with a kind heart, and I'm just speaking educationally. I'm not against any of my Trinitarian brethren. I'm just sharing the research with all of us so that we can know that the apostles were actually oneness. They believed in one God. They didn't believe in the Trinity. The Trinity was something that was presented in the church world to win the pagans who could not grasp the idea or could not accept the idea of a single one true God, one-headed Godheaded. So the Catholics tried to appease the pagans by creating a religious system that resembled their system of polytheism. And that's because they had in their, coming from Babylon, there were mother gods and son gods and baby gods and father gods, trinities. And so from that particular culture and teaching, they got the Trinity and they brought it into the Catholic Church to win the pagans, because they wanted to keep, the Constantine wanted the kingdom not to be divided at any cost. And one of the costs was to make something that everybody can go along with. And the polytheistic characteristics of the Trinity were what won the pagans to Catholicism. And not only that they win the pagans to Catholicism, but they brought in multitudes and multitudes of other false doctrines through people like St. Augustine, who brought in much paganism and Gnosticism, even in the Mother Mary, worshiping of the Mother Mary, and all of those different things that were brought in through St. Augustine and other pagans and philosophies, and they interwoven all those things into the Catholic Church. Now, that's not my teaching tonight, but I had to bring that in to show you that those religious ideas from the Babylonian kingdom are spread all over the world, and even in what we call, quote, Christendom. I don't consider that pagan stuff as Christian, but the world sees it as Christian. They see that this Catholic Church is a Christian church, and there's been tons and tons of studies, even by Catholics, on how much paganism is in Catholicism, and how they've dressed up paganism with the Trinity and the worship of Mary and all of the vow of celibacy. Vow of celibacy, priests can't get married. That's a form of Gnosticism. Gnosticism was a belief that nature, Augustine, he believed that we transferred sin by a father and mother. In other words, where a child gets the sin nature was through their mother and father. Their mother and father came together and had them, and they had the sin nature through sex. Now, you know that's of the devil. You know that it is. Every man is born in sin, shaping in iniquities, because he's in the family of Adam, man or woman. But those are the kinds of demonic things that were taught by Augustine, and Augustine is considered one of their highest honored men. And he was one of the most detrimental, most poisonous, and the most Gnostic teacher in the world, that impacted the world. And we'll talk some about Augustine in some future lessons. And I'm not the only one who knows this. There's multitudes of Catholic scholars who know it. Multitude of them, multitude of Protestant scholars who know about the corruption of Augustine. All right, now, so I said that in reference to the discussion of false religions in the world. But when we go back to the pagan gods of the Old Testament, and we go back to paganism, how do we know that the God that we serve is the correct God? Is this God we serve the Creator? Is this God we serve the God of Adam and Eve, the God of Abel, the God of Enoch, the God of Elijah, the God of Noah? Is this God? Yes. We're going to identify him as the God before the tower. The God before the tower is the God that we serve. All other gods came after the tower. So the God before the tower is the God of Abraham. The God before the tower is the God of Adam, the God of Noah, the God of Enoch, the God of Abel. That's the God before the tower. Gods after the tower are made up gods, false gods. And we are not to be intimidated by them. And if you would be careful to study, and I would say this to you, that according to Revelation chapter 17 and 5, now there's two ways we can figure that the false gods all originated at the Tower of Babel. We can do it by tracking the history. We can do it by listing those gods and what happened at Babel. It is a multitude of horrible things that happened at Babel. We can list the things that happened at Babel. We can trace those gods from Babel to wherever they went, and we can also go to Revelation chapter 17, verse 5, or we can go to Romans chapter 1 and verse 20 and read on down, verse 19, 18, 19. And it'll just tell us right there where it all comes from. We can just either research it or read it. But it is clear from Revelation 17 and 18 that Babylon, and I guess I need to read that in your hearing tonight, where and this is revelatory because it helps us as Christians to be able to identify what's going on with the gods and how to know who the true God is. Okay, in Revelation chapter 17, in verse number, let's go to verse number 4. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand, full of abomination and filthiness of her fornication. And up on her forehead was a name written, Mystery Babylon, the great mother of harlots and abomination of the earth. So there it is right there. It tells you the mother of all harlots, all of them come out of her. what is it about Babylon that they come out? Because of the anti-God, devil flirting with spirit that was in man, made man rebel. And under the dispensation of human government, under which the Tower of Babel was, there was no righteous person. There were no prophets, no priests that were righteous. Men were going according to human nature, the flesh of man. And so when the flesh of man was turned loose, man created all of these things. That was when the Apostle Paul described it in Romans chapter 1 and verse number 18, 19. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness, because that which may be known of God and manifest in them. For God hath shown it unto them. In other words, by revelation, this man should have worshiped God. For the invisible thing, in other words, he's telling them that they had no excuse not to believe God. But they did. And so what happened at the Tower of Babel, that was a turning point of the world. That was when the world of sin and shame was inaugurated to be in power of the world. That was what you call the inauguration of the world of sin and shame and of false religion. That was when man was cut loose and came up with his own religions, came up with his own ideologies. And all of this comes from the curse of the fall, the curse of Adam, the false religions, the false gods. All of this comes from the curse of Adam. And so in our minds, in our study, we divide the God before Babel. We show the God before Babel as the God that we should be serving, as a God we should be believing in. Now, the God before Babel also was the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. The God who was before Babel, the reason why I say when classifying him as the God before Babel was because before the Tower of Babel, man was all one. There was no Jew and no Gentile. God was just dealing with man as a whole at that time, and God was making his appeals to man, and God was appealing and wooing man, and they only had God to communicate with. There was no false gods to communicate with. Now there was a bit of false religion by Cain when he brought the improper sacrifice, but there were no false gods. Man had not gone that far yet. What happened at Babel, man actually divorced God. And God put him out. Man broke away from God. The Tower of Babel is a study that every preacher needs to take out time to look at it, because it is so much information in it. It tells there's so much, even in the book of Revelation, even in the future generations, even at Pentecost. Pentecost is relative to the Tower of Babel because Pentecost was the opposite extreme of what happened at Babel. Whereas at Babel they were scattered, Pentecost they gathered. At Babel they spoke in confused tongues. At Pentecost they spoke in understandable tongues. They were foreign but understandable tongues. At Babel they met at a horrible place. At Pentecost they met at Jerusalem, the headquarters of God. At Babel they were at the headquarters of false religion. The word name Babylon means the gate of gods, the gate of the gods. In Babylon there were 1,000 Babylonian, the one that was rebuilt about 600 BC. There was 1,000 false god temples in that place. So, all of the gods of Egypt, all of the gods of Babylon, the Syrian gods, and all of those gods of the Old Testament are Babylonian gods. And that's how we separate this in our studies. We don't ever say, oh, they have the right. They don't have a right to do anything. They have a right to bow down and worship the only true God. So, in our presentation of the true God, we're going to actually, what I want to do is I want to show you, first of all, that he's the God before the Tower of Babel. He's going to be the God in the finality of all things, in the culmination of the ages. He's the God of the church. He's the God of Israel. If you're trying to find out who we're talking about, He's the God that brought the Israelites through the wilderness. He's the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He's the God of the church. He's Peter's God. He's Paul's God. He's James' God. He's the church's God today. We serving the true and the living God. And all others, like the Apostle John said, he said that we are in him who is true. In 1 John 5:21, and he says, the world lies in wickedness. He said, he's the only true God, and the world lies in wickedness. Then he says, my little children, keep yourselves from idols, because there is no God but the true God. All right, so in our distinction of the true and living God, I wanted to make a difference between when we talk about the true God. How do you know you got the right God? Let's say if we were in the Old Testament, and in the Old Testament, it was a thing, what you call the God that was most powerful was the God that they worshiped. Now, that is not, that's not such a bad thing, because God played the same game. I mean, it wasn't a game with him. God had the same program. God revealed himself to us by his mighty power so that men would believe him. And so they would have no excuse not to believe him. Everything, as I said in the last lesson, everything that God established, he established by power. And so it's those that have the power to believe. Now, let us distinguish between the false gods of the Old Testament and our true God. And what I want to do is I want to use the comparison of power. The comparison of power. The powers that validate, it was supposed to validate a God. I want to compare the powers of the false God, the powers of the devil, with the powers of God. And I want to separate them out in my notes tonight. One, the powers of the false gods and the powers of the devil are called, we call them magic. And the powers of God, we call those miracles. Magic and miracles might mean the same thing in some people, to some people, but there is actually a vast difference between the two terms. It is proper to say that Jesus worked miracles, but it would be wrong to attribute his works to magic. Basically, magic and miracles differ in their source. Magic has either a human or a demonic source, but miracles are the supernatural, powerful acts of God. Yes, there are things in the universe. There are resources and powers in the universe. There is the astrology, the zodiac, which was once a means of understanding the universe and even understanding individual lives and predicting things. But the astrology, in that sense, has been it has been unauthorized because men have sought to use astrology as opposed to coming to the true God. They wanted to know the stars as opposed to knowing the one who made the stars. And so God is wooing man to himself. There are two different kinds of magic, and it is good to distinguish between the two. Entertainers who use slight tricks and illustrations in their performances, often called magicians, but they are actually illusionists, which is what most of them prefer to be called, an illusionist. Audiences does not consider what they see to be real. In other words, they are playing a game. The audience understands that it's a trick, and so they don't take them as seriously. But they may have taken those magicians of the Old Testament God seriously when they did things. Do not be surprised to hear what you hear that can be done by the power of Satan, because remember now, if you would look in the book of Revelation, when the Antichrist is going to be empowered by Satan to work mighty miracles. Satan will tap into the universe and the sources of power and miracles that are in power and magic that are in the universe. There are things, there are majestical powers. There is divinations, and there's soothsayers, and there's the occult that taps into what we call the natural supernatural. Why do I call it the natural supernatural? Because it's in the natural world and the natural realm. But the supernatural is that which is out of the realm of that bank or that reservoir of supernatural powers that the devil may tap into. The devil taps into those things. And so the difference between God's miracles and the magic is that the magic is something that resorts to man. You see, there are lots of things about the universe that a lot of us don't know or whatever, or we don't realize or don't recognize. Like, for instance, they say that we only use maybe a small percent of the brain. Now, we use a small percent of the brain, and we are able to do all the stuff we're able to do with technology and everything like that. What would it be like if a man was using 100% of his brain? He probably would be able to fly. He probably would be able to see behind doors and predict things. That was probably the way Adam was. Adam was probably using 100% of the brain, and they gave him supernatural powers. So there's supernatural powers that are accessible down within us. And then you have the stars and the constellations. There is that you can read those. Then there is the occult. So there are a number of things that are in the what we call the underworld that the devil can resort to when he wants to deceive. One thing I will say is that the devil can resort to these things, but he cannot whoop anything on a saint if the saint is unwilling or if the saint is not in the devil's territory. You see, the occult can't just come over to your house and take over your house. You have to go and be fooling around with the occult and get caught up in it in order for a saint to get affected by that. The occult and the devil can't just come and disrupt our churches because we have a fence built around us. But if we get on the devil's territory, for those who are foolish enough to follow the devil, they can be affected by the occult and those different things. So then let's look at this. The difference between the miracles is that the miracles of God, they come directly from God, and the miracles or the magic of the devil comes from human sources, demonic sources, and sources within the universe that they tap into. They're actually what you may call natural, supernatural things. They're actually natural in the universe, whereas those things that God does, they are supernatural things. All right? So now, the major difference between the magic and miracles is the magic of the devil and the miracles, the magic of the devil, the magic of the Babylonian people, and the miracles is that magic draws upon power that is not directly from God. And miracles are the results of God's power intervening in the world. Magic is an attempt to circumvent God in the acquisition of knowledge and power. That's magic. That's magic. In other words, instead of praying, I'll go and let somebody read a crystal ball to me. The city of Ephesus was a battleground between magic and miracles. The pagan population of Ephesus was steeped in idolatry and involved in magic, but then Paul brought the gospel to that city, and with the gospel came true power through the apostle. God did extraordinary miracles through Paul, and that's in Acts 19 and 11. Seeing what Paul did, so some what you call exorcists, these exorcists, they were called in that passage the seven sons of Sceva, attempted to duplicate his miracles. See, they were already into the sorcery and things like that, but Paul's power was so real and so powerful that they said, we got to have that. But they failed miserably and publicly in verse number 13 through 16. When a large number of Ephesians were saved through the preaching of Paul, a large number of Ephesians were saved through the preaching of Paul, this brought great glory to God brought great glory to God, and it showed that God was greater than the devil. And so that is something that God does. He shows that he's greater than the devil. Also in Deuteronomy, in the book of, okay, before we go to, let's go to Mark. Another difference between magic and miracles is that magic does not glorify God, but miracles do. See Mark 2:12. A good example of a magician's self-promotion is found in Samaria. A man named Simon had practiced sorcery in the city and amazed all the people of Samaria. He boasted that he was someone great, and all the people, both high and low, gave him their attention and exclaimed, "This man is rightly called the great power of God." Sometimes people be calling some people that they have the power of God. They don't have the power of God. Got the power of the devil. Sometimes they have the power of the devil. And so they thought that he had the power of God, but he did not have the power of God. And but Simon had an ability to amaze the crowds with his magic, but it was not the power of God. Simon's performances were all about himself and enriched his own life. Later, Simon, the magician, sees a true miracle performed by Peter and John, and he offers to buy from them the secret of their trick. And that's in verse number 18 and 19 of Acts chapter 8. Peter immediately rebuked Simon. In Simon's sinful heart, he had equated the power of the Holy Ghost with his own sorcery. Verse number 20 through 23. In other words, in all these cases, God always shows his power. God always shows up. Another difference between magic and miracles is that magic involves manipulation in opposition to the truth, but miracles reveal the truth. Magicians attempts to manipulate people for personal gain. The worker of miracles simply showcases the power and the glory of God. The city of Patmos on the Isle of Cyprus, was another battleground between the miraculous and the magical. As Paul and Barnabas were preaching in that city, they were opposed by a Jewish sorcerer and a false prophet by the name of Bar-Jesus, who was an attendant of the Precusum and the Sergius Paulissa, and that is in Acts 13, 6-7. This sorcerer also called Ilmas, had worms his way into the political establishment of Cyprus. When the proconsul began to listen to the missionaries' message, they tried to turn the council from the faith. But Paul, being filled with the Holy Ghost, this man tried to turn the council away from the faith, tried to make the council not believe in God. But Paul, thank God for the Apostle Paul. This is the reason why we talk about we have to have the demonstration of the power of God. Paul, being filled with the Holy Ghost, confronted this man head on. You are a child of the devil and an enemy of everything that is right. You are full of all kinds of deceit and trickery. Will you never stop perverting the right way of the Lord? Paul then performed a miracle, striking the man blind, showing that the miracle working power of God is greater than the magic of the devil. And the result was that the people believed the gospel and many were saved. Another good comparison of the miracles of God and the magic of the Babylonian world is found in the book of Exodus. The workers of magic in Egypt were called the sorcerers and magicians. However, this is in Exodus 7 and 11. And however, Moses and Aaron are never identified by those terms. The works that God did through Moses were true miracles, whereas the tricks of Pharaoh's magicians were meant to deceive and harden the king's heart. Early in the story, there is a showdown in the court. Aaron throws his rod down and it turns into a snake. And Pharaoh's magicians throw their rod down and their rod turns into a snake as well. But what happened was Aaron's snake ate up the snakes of the magicians. That was God saying that God has all power over magicians and all kinds of sorcery. Because he is the true God, he will never be outdone, even when it comes to miracles and power. So you don't have to worry about God being outdone or worry about sorcerers being greater than us, because the sorcerers and those who deceive will never be greater or never be as great as God. God is the true God, and he has all power. And as we said in the previous lesson concerning power, God proved himself to be powerful in his virgin birth. That's a proof. As the prophet said, behold, I should give to you a sign. A sign. A virgin shall conceive and bear a son. That's a sign. That's a scientific sign. That's a sign that God wants us to have. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and his name shall be called Emmanuel. The virgin birth is a sign. The death of Christ on the cross is a sign. The resurrection of Christ is a sign. There's no false God that can do that. The ascension of Christ is a sign that we are serving the true and the living God. So as we begin to conclude this particular lesson, Revelation 17 tells us where all false religions come from. It also tells us what the seed of atheism and agnosticism, where it originated from. Atheism and agnosticism all come from the Tower of Babel. They come from the devil. They come from humanism, man's opinion apart from what God has said. And in Romans 1:20 through 25, Paul describes the conditions of the world due to the spirit of man that was displayed at the Tower of Babel. From this, I intend to show that there are no real false gods. They are made-up gods used to draw men away from the true God. Those who worship him are in the truth, and the rest of the world is in darkness. Islam, Buddhism, and all of the other false fleshly inspired demonic religions are according to Revelation 17 and 5, harlots. That means they are false gods that come out of Babylon. And that sums it up. You don't need to look anywhere. You don't need to get an opinion. You don't need to say, well, maybe they are right. If you say that, then you are in the Babylonian. They are not of God. They are not equal to the faith of the true God. They are adultery and false religion. Adulterers and false religion. So tonight, the true God is distinguished from the false gods by the display and the purpose and the working of his power, by the display and the purpose of his glory. The true God, we are serving the one and only true God. Thank you very much. We hope that you stay tuned.